And we're live. It is Monday, the 12th of October, the year of our Lord 2025. It is 8 o'clock a.m. Washington time, and I was going to greet you with a happy Columbus Day or a happy Indigenous Peoples Day or a happy Columbus Day, Indigenous Peoples Day, and it realized that this was the only holiday in the world that we observe, but we observe it without a stable reference point, as in, maybe it's not the only holiday in that, but I can't think of another one off the top of my head that we all observe. It's not like, at least in the United States, we all observe, but we don't observe the same day, and we have a political argument about what day we are observing because we are a divided, polarized country that can agree that this is a holiday, but can't agree whether about the name of the holiday or what it signifies. And I just want to say that I have no part in that. I don't really acknowledge that it's a holiday at all. It's a work day for me. I don't take it off. Um, I don't believe that we should be fighting about these things. There are more pressing matters to discuss, honestly. So I'm just going to move on. It's a happy Monday to you all. A happy October. Oh, it's 13th of October, not the 12th of October. It's a happy October 13th. And if you want to get in the mud and fight about whether it's an Italian American holiday that commemorates Christopher Columbus, and or if you want to think of it as a day that celebrates indigeneity, whatever that may be, wherever it is in the world. Um, I wish you the best. I'm a conscientious objector in that fight. I'm not going to take part in it. I'm not going to tell you not to do it. I mean, you do you. But that's one's a fight for other people. I'll tell you what is my fight, and I want you all, if you live in the DC area, to help me with this. It is the end of sunflower season, and the sunflowers at the sunflower garden across the street from the Russian embassy have all become stalks. They are no longer in bloom. They are dead. And I feel an obligation to the landowner who let us use that plot of land to clear it out. We clean up after ourselves, good kindergarten students. And so I thought, what are we going to do with about 100, 150 large, some of them are like 8 feet tall, dead sunflowers? And I thought, it occurred to me that the answer is littering. Now, if you drop a pile of dead sunflowers in front of the Russian embassy, the police get mad at you. They don't really do anything about it. I've been confronted about it a few times. I've made a few videos of myself walking across the street with an armful of dead sunflowers and dropping them in front of the Russian embassy. And the Russians get really upset. And the police, they will come over and talk to you about it. But here's the thing. If you did 100 or 200 sunflowers, I think you would get in Arlo Guthrie Alice's restaurant territory. So I don't think we could have a mass operation. And if you organized, say, a dozen people to move all the sunflowers over there, I'm sure the police would intervene. So, but if you do one sunflower, which I did yesterday, and I posted a cool little Instagram video of myself uprooting a sunflower and moving it over to the other side, dropping it casually in front of the embassy. If you drop one sunflower, you know, it annoys the Russians, but it's beneath the notice of the police. And that is the vibe I'm going for. So I want to encourage you all to go to the Polonaise sunflower garden, uproot one sunflower, casually walk across the street and drop it on the DC pavement outside the Russian embassy. I want you to do that with an awareness that you might be ticketed for littering if the cops are there and in a bad mood. Probably won't. I've never been. But I want to encourage you to litter. And I want you to steal. You have permission to take my private property, the sunflowers on that garden, and uproot them. And then what you do with them is really your business. So sprites of mischief everywhere. If you're coming through DC, drop a sunflower, a dead sunflower representing murdered people and their assault on the national aspirations of Ukraine in front of the Russian embassy. Just don't think about it too hard. Just do it. You can see a video of me doing it. It is a conspiracy to litter. But by the way, it is actually not a conspiracy. And let me explain to you why, because a conspiracy is an agreement between two or more people. And it's really more of an incitement to litter, because we're not agreeing that you're going to do this. I am merely inciting you to do it. And by the way, incitement has to be legally incitement under US law, it has to be of a type and character to inspire imminent lawless action, as in, if I were standing with you and you were holding a bunch of sunflowers and I said, go across the street and drop those in front of the embassy, and then that would be incitement to litter. This is more encouragement to litter, and we cannot, I'm just afraid you can't treat that as an incitement. And so, Kash Patel, come at me, folks. You're welcome to come investigate me for incitement here. I have 3 words for you: Brandenburg v. Ohio. And to everybody else, go out there, uproot a sunflower, drop it across in front of the Russian embassy, and shoot me a picture of it. Because, what's the worst that'll happen? You get a $50 littering fine, and then you can strum a bar of Alice's restaurant. Because remember, that was the crime in that case, was littering. And he made quite a career out of that. So, folks, we are joined by Nastya, who is...
Hi,
where are you, Nastya?
on a train already
She
in
is,
Ukraine.
but I cannot hear a word she is saying, and I think
Can anyone,
I don't have
can
my
other people hear me?
headphones on. Can I hear you
Yeah,
now?
people can hear me.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Can you
Okay.
hear me now? Okay,
Yeah.
great.
So tell us about where you are.
I'm on a train. I
Yeah,
just
we got
left.
that part.
I'm coming back from Norway. And the journey is always annoying and long. This time it was even more annoying because there was like a 2-hour delay before we could board this train. So we were all standing in the cold, and you know, I already have various frustrations with the Poles and the Polish government, and like just standing there for 2 hours in the cold did not alleviate them one bit.
So are
Um,
you still in Poland, or are you back in
no,
Ukraine?
we already crossed the border like an hour ago. Stopped in Lviv, picked up a bunch of more people, and just left to leave train station and are on the way to Kyiv. And I'll be in Kyiv in like 8 hours.
Remember, folks, distances in Europe are short, but in Ukraine are long, because it is a
I
big country.
it's the biggest country in Europe.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
at least the biggest country entirely in Europe. Um,
Well, yeah, we're not
I'm
counting
not
Russia. Yeah,
I'm not sure if it's as big as Turkey either. But Turkey is mostly in Asia. Um,
yeah.
um, yeah. So Kate says, "Tell us about the Russians in Oslo." Uh, so I think you need
I wrote
to
about
start.
it in the newsletter.
Yeah. So you have questions,
You,
girl.
uh, Russians in Oslo. There were a lot of them, as always. As I wrote in my newsletter, I've been to Norway 3 times, and every time I come, I'm just vastly outnumbered by Russians, either
Ruski
exile
Mir, man.
journalists, yeah,
They're taking
or
over.
just like that's what we've been saying. Um, yeah, and I'm gonna go into this at the risk of having my career destroyed if someone finds this on YouTube, but I actually had a very surprising experience this time because I met four Russian journalists and a partner of one of them. They're all exiled, so they all work abroad now. Two of them live in the US, the rest live in Norway. And we had a dinner after they were also participating in the event that I was invited to speak at, and we all had a dinner afterwards. And it was a very surprisingly positive experience in that we touched on, all the things. We talked about the language issue, we talked about the Russian opposition, about Navalny, about, Russian imperialism and all of the things. And like they ended up agreeing with me on all of it. And even when we had certain like initial disagreements on the language issue, I actually managed to change their minds. And they like genuinely understood what I was trying to say and why that makes sense than their initial opinion. Uh, and that was just shocking to me. I mean, not
Why was
that,
it shocking?
you know, so the most
I mean,
shocking, so
it's a big country. There are
I will,
if
so
you
yeah, like I,
if you focus on the group that are dissident enough to be living abroad, you're going to have a range of views, some of which are going to
yeah,
be not very different from yours, right? Why does this
right.
blow your mind?
Yeah, so well, just first of all, I like never interact with any Russian citizens like ever. Like the first time I've interacted with them since the war was also in Norway, like years ago. And so I just don't have any exposure to them, and obviously there is a very certain dynamic happening in Ukraine where you only have
Right.
certain opinions about them. But so I never subscribed to sort of the mainstream view of like, there are no good Russians, they're all terrorists. I never believed that. I believe most of them are. Like I believe most of them, like the vast majority of them support the war. But I also know that like just sort of basic logic and math dictates that of course there are some of them who have normal opinions. And it just so happened that I'm at like a small part of this tiny minority in Norway. That actually wasn't the shocking part. The more shocking part to me was that when we talked about all of the sort of mainstream Ukrainian views, like the criticisms of the Russian opposition and all of that, that they actually agreed with all of it. So I had this like amazing sense of validation that like, oh, okay, so we didn't make this shit up, or like this isn't driven purely by emotion. Like, because they also think that all of these people, Karamurza or Navalny or all of them, they agree that all of them are utterly useless. Like, and they don't like any of them. They sorry. And and they were like, let's take Karam Murza, like the guy who was in prison in Russia and then was exchanged. Uh, and they were like, well, I guess he's a brave guy because he risked prison and went to prison, but like that's it. Like he isn't really a politician. He isn't really doing anything that could help anyone's lives. Like they just exist. And then they also thought that Navalny was, had a lot of problematic views. Same with Navalnaya, his wife, and it was just wonderful for me to be like, okay, so like great, like you guys actually agree that you don't have any united and they also were like this is a huge they were saying that it's a huge Russian problem that their opposition doesn't really exist as a united front. Like all of these people who've been exiled, all of the people who suffer from the Kremlin, they're all bickering all the time. So we Ukrainians also didn't make this up. And it was just a very validating, like interesting experience to have them, say that. So that was that. Now,
So
it
are you
doesn't change my views about the Russian people at large. And, I'm not now suddenly very sympathetic towards them, but I'm more so actually validated that the Ukrainians are right, you know.
so are you I mean, I don't know what it means to talk about the Russian people in the sense that we have no real public opinion data that anybody should have any confidence in. There's, my experience of Russians in DC is that um, most of them is that their opinions are quite diverse, actually, and they range from quite integrated into the Ukrainian community um, and very accepted by the Ukrainian community to radical Putinists, and sort of there's kind of
Yeah.
everywhere in between. But um, I do think Ukrainians have a way of like, instead of acknowledging that there are good Russians, just making exceptions for, Russians who've joined the cause in some way. They're just accepted as Ukrainians, even though they're not. Um,
I feel
and
like
I
that's a stretch. I mean, like accepted as Ukrainians,
I
or
mean,
you
I
mean in
have
the same manner as other Ukrainians?
no. So let me give you an example of this from the DC community. There is a guy in he's Russian. I don't think he is Ukrainian at all. His name is Gleb, and he rides around DC with on a bicycle with a giant Ukrainian flag flying off the back, and his car has the initials of the armed forces of Ukraine as its license plate. And he spends his time. He's a wonderful guy. He spends his time um, uh, bringing Ukrainian military who are injured and need to spend time in DC to be at Walter Reed. He organizes, housing for them, um, and he's just treated as a Ukrainian by the Ukrainian community here. I mean, everybody knows he's Russian, but
Okay,
nobody.
but I mean, like, nobody is looking at him as a literal Ukrainian, like, citizen. They just treat
No,
him
no, no, no,
as
no. I
they
just
would a
mean
Ukrainian.
I'm
Okay.
I'm just mean as like part of the community. Um, and there's another woman, Olya, who's in very much the same position. And you sit around with Ukrainians and they say there are no good Russians, and then you say, well, what about Gleb and Olya? And they say, oh, that's different. And to an American outsider, that doesn't really make any sense because it's not different. They are, in fact, Russians. And but there is a way. But I actually think it's kind of beautiful. You 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 have this way of defining the community that envelops everybody that you would otherwise have to call a good Russian. You just kind of say, "Oh, they're part of us," or "They're that's different," um, and um, and it allows you to draw very black and white lines, but the lines aren't in fact black and white because there are lots of people who there is in fact commerce between the communities. Um, uh, there are a gazillion ways that you create exceptions. And by the way, you see the same thing in almost all conflict arenas where, you know, human life gets in the way of the ideology, right? You just have, but I like, you know, I think it's really, great that, you have like that Norway is providing a place where, you guys can have that dinner and, realize that there's more going on um, than is ideologically publicly acknowledgeable, so that you can, come on the show and say, not that the purpose is so that you can come on the show, but you can start by saying, okay, I'm going to get canceled for saying this, but hey, I met some good Russians. Like that's actually pretty
And
cool.
I can only say it here, there is like, there is no other avenue for this in Ukraine. I can't talk about it. I can't write about it, which
Right.
I
And you,
like. It's uncomfortable, but I also think it's like, this is not the time. Like, it's not like what's needed right now to stop the war is for people to suddenly feel a surge of sympathy towards the Russian people. You know what I mean? Like, we can
exactly.
we can talk about all of these polemics after the war ends and unpack all of the injustices or processes, whatever. But right now, yeah, nobody wants to hear this, and I understand it.
No,
And I
it's not.
do, go ahead.
It's not the time for it. I mean, like there
Exactly,
are
which
times
is
to to
normal.
to to sit down and have cultural dialogue and to sort of figure out how removed the center of gravities of, where where there is still Venn diagram overlap, but while Ukrainian cities are being rocketed on a day-to-day basis, it's just completely unreasonable to expect that conversation to happen right now.
And I
When it's
did.
ready to happen, my living room is available. Um,
Yeah,
so,
but
Nastia, you actually wanted to talk about something else, which is that you have been reading
which is
Ta-Nehisi Coates and wanted to talk about. Whoops! You see, I just invoked the name Ta-Nehisi Coates, and Nastia disappeared. Um, so I'm going to assume that was an accident, and that she'd be back. And here she is. So you've
my
been reading.
internet was like, enough of this shit. Like, no, we're not going into it.
So you wanted to talk about Palestine, and
A much nicer topic than the Russians.
yeah, a much
Very
nicer
chill.
topic. uh, Not heavily laden with any emotional baggage at all. Tell us what's on your mind.
I don't even know where to start. It's also like, okay, this lighting situation is annoying me. It also must be annoying for you guys because you keep see it flickering. So
It's
I'll
fine.
change where it's. Okay. Uh, where do I even start?
I think we should start
Um,
with Lior's very important point. Um, uh, the
the
conflict is
conflict is
over,
over,
Trump
so don't
says,
worry
so we
about
don't
it.
need to worry about it. There's a new Middle East. The last time somebody said there was a new Middle East was Shimon Peres after Oslo, and that didn't work out too well. And so I just want to uh, warn everybody against premature declarations of a new Middle East.
Yeah, I agree with that. Um, well, so I don't even know where to start. I mean, I just actually almost finished reading his book, The Message, his new book that's on all American bookshelves. Uh, I liked it. It's not all about Israel and Palestine. It's actually a collection of essays. There are three big essays, and only one of them is about his trip to Palestine. Uh, and I mean, his whole thing is that he went to the West Bank and he, went to Tel Aviv and other parts of Israel. And he spent some time with Palestinians. He spent some time with Breaking the Silence, which is a group of IDF soldiers who, give these tours and to share their experience in the IDF and how much they hated it and how much it's all horrible. So obviously a very, I guess pro-Palestinian version of things, but I'm like, I'm just like really struggling with figuring out what to think about all of it because ever since I actually met you, Ben, and we became close, family friends. Uh, it's like one of the big things that always, anytime I have any thought pop into my mind about any of it, I'm like, there's little Ben sitting in my brain being like, are you sure that this is the most balanced and like the most fair way to see this, because obviously you're Jewish and your wife is Jewish and your whole family is Jewish and it's, you know, that matters to me. And we have a lot of conversations about all of this. But okay, to put it very simply, is that, and I'm not even talking about the war in Gaza right now, but the things that I keep reading about what's happening in the West Bank make it really hard for me to feel anything but like this is really evil stuff and there is no gray zone. There can be, because like this shit isn't justifiable. Which is also how I feel about the war in Gaza. Like, I don't think you can look at what happened over the entire war and be okay with it for one, or not even be okay with it. Like I don't think any military doctrine, something, like could be enough to justify what happened. That's like my emotional sort of moral impulse, you know. And so
Hmm.
that's kind of what Tanahasi is doing. He obviously a lot of people have argued that, oh, you're not giving a balanced view. And he's like, look, I'm a writer in like this very Orwellian kind of fashion. He's like, my job is to tell the truth. I go, I like look with my eyes at what's happening and I tell you exactly what I saw. You can make your own mind about it, but this is how I saw it. And he goes and he sees what's happening in the West Bank and he describes it. And I read it and I think it's fucking horrifying. And I sort of, again, I'm like, how can you justify what's happening here? Like, what kind of logic can you give to this? Now, if I'm totally wrong and I'm gonna start losing subscribers in Substack, that's fine. But like, that's kind of my emotional response.
Yeah. So first of all, it's not that different from my response. Um, if you're so if you're focused, uh, if you focus on, whoops, yo, chill out, girl. Um, if you're focused on what is happening in the West Bank, um, it is extremely hard to justify Israeli policy with respect to settlements in the West Bank. Um, Now, there's a separate question. Hey, shut up. There's a separate question that is much harder, which is if you control for all the policy that is completely indefensible with respect to settlements, what would a policy based just around legitimate security concerns look like, given that the last time the Israeli government tried to tried sensible withdrawal and separation in the West Bank, it got the 2000 Second Intifada. And so there's a very legitimate question as to how could you disengage in a fashion that didn't greatly endanger day-to-day Israeli lives. but that's not the policy that the Israeli government is pursuing. So in my view, you don't really have to reach that question if your question if the issue is the settlement policy. And I just think the settlement policy is completely indefensible. It's indefensible as a moral matter. It's indefensible uh, as an international legal matter, and it's indefensible as a strategic matter because it involves enveloping a rather large population in under Israeli rule, without any strategy for giving it rights. And it seems to me the only way the settlement policy could be remotely justifiable is if you meant to annex the entire West Bank and give voting rights to its population. So once you acknowledge all of that, the difference between what the difference between people will fade. Um, uh, and Lior, by the way, Lior is a Jerusalem uh, Israeli. Uh,
Oh, I'm
raises
really
an
walking into something here.
no. He's probably left of you, actually. um,
Okay. Oh
um,
no,
uh,
I was
it's
being very careful in my description of my opinions here.
No, it's also indefensible, as Lior says, for Israeli security reasons and for the long-term existence of Israel as a democracy. There is no, and by the way, this is nothing novel to Ta-Nehisi Coates. The first person who made this argument, to my knowledge, was a very great ultra Orthodox, actually, Israeli intellectual in 1967 who wrote, named Yeshayahu Leibovitz, who wrote a um, essay within days, literally days, of the end of the Six-Day War that argued that the key day was the seventh day, which was when the Israeli army did not leave the territories that um, it had conquered, and basically predicting everything that's happened. It's a very brief essay, since you're really into essays now.
Yeah, I should read it.
But it's, I mean, this is not a new problem. It's a problem that has existed as long as the occupation has existed, and and so I don't actually think between reasonable. I don't think there's a if you're pro-Israel or pro-Palestine. I don't even know what that phrase mean. Those phrases mean to it like there is no defense of this policy that does not resort to uh, um, that does not resort to either the language of conquest or the language of magic. And by the way, most people defend it with reference to some combination of the two. Now, where I jump off the left bandwagon, is that it is not at all clear to me that if you, well, if you imagine an Israeli government that were a smart strategically, not injected with messianic ideology, not beholden to crazed ultra orthodox needs with respect to um, uh, um, the army, and not obsessed with settlement, and that was purely driven by some combination of security, democracy, and reasonable strategy concerns. It's not clear to me that there is a viable solution here that doesn't create a lot of problems as well. And I think there's a lot of magical thinking on the left that if you merely respect everybody's rights and
They
do
will
the
just get
right thing,
along.
the problem will go away. And I do not believe that actually at all. I think there is an intractability to a lot of this that is, that I have not read Ta-Nehisi Coates' essay, but a lot of what the left assumes is that if you merely do the right thing, the security problems will take care of themselves, and they won't. And so, and that is the lesson of the 1990s, where Israel really did try to do the right thing and really did try to come to a peaceful understanding, and they got a huge amount of violence in response. And then their response to that, which was the Sharon government, which was to try to implement it unilaterally and just get out of Gaza and get out of Lebanon, that was ended really badly too. And so I do think there is a problem that the Israeli government faces structurally, that is, you're damned if you do and damned if you don't. And if you if you withdraw, we will punish you for that. If you don't withdraw, we will punish you for that. If you, as Kierkegaard said, if you marry, you will regret it. If you don't marry, you will regret it. And if you kill yourself, you will regret it. And if you don't kill yourself, you will regret it. And there's a lot of that going on that I think the left really doesn't acknowledge. But if the question is the policy in the West Bank defensible? The answer is hell no. And I don't
Yeah,
like
that's
I don't
comforting to me. So
I
this
don't
is not
think
a
there's
crazy
any.
opinion.
No, no, no. And by the way, I think I don't know what percentage of Israelis would agree. Israeli Jews would agree with that. Is that's not a
I don't know.
trivial person.
I keep seeing a lot of reporting that suggests that, well, about the war in Gaza. I don't know if that correlates with the West
Yeah,
Bank, but I assume it correlates with the West Bank.
no, do not
Like,
make that assumption. So this is
really?
one
Okay,
of the
why?
key mistakes that everybody makes about Israel, which is
Okay, I don't
assuming
understand this.
assuming that something that is true in one part of the mosaic is equally true in another part of the mosaic. So let me give you the most extreme example of this. Uh, Arab non-Israelis who are living under occupation, right? Bad thing. Everybody, doesn't support that, right? That's not a good thing. Unless you happen to be a Golan Druze Syrian, in which case, um, you know, the occupation, which is no longer even an occupation because it's been annexed and it's part of Israel now for all domestic law purposes, is, well, like really the best thing that ever happened to your village and family. And by the way, the only question is whether you should take Israeli citizenship. And by the way, the Israeli army is protecting your family's villages on the other side of the line as well. And you don't see any big protests there. Um, uh, because in fact, and some of them have to say that they're Syrian and, the Golan is Syrian, but there's no national liberation movement there. And really the question is, what percentage of those people will end up serving in the Israeli army and voting in Israel? And by the way, when you go there, you don't cross any military checkpoints, and you may now because of the war, but this is not an area. It doesn't feel like an area under occupation. It feels like it feels like, and all the signage, by the way, is in Hebrew as well as in Arabic, and the relations between Israelis and Golan Druze are not just, they're warm. It's a real thing. And so even the most basic rule that you can say, which is like, boy, it sucks to be living under occupation, even that gets complicated. Uh, and so, all right, let's take um, the war in Gaza from an Israeli point of view. And I want to say that no part of me supports the last 8 months of the Gaza war strategy. Okay, none. Um, but the war in Gaza, from an Israeli point of view, is a purely defensive war, and um, and if you've never been to the area that borders Gaza, it is hard to describe how close proximity Israeli communities that are not occupying anything. They're just, you know, well, one of them is a fairly big city, Sderot. And then there are these little moshavim and kibbutzim that just kind of ring Gaza, and they're all within the green line. There's not, this is not an occupation, and there were a lot of people murdered, and there is no confidence in the Israeli population that you can manage this problem in a purely defensive way. And so the sense that you would go on offense in October 2024 or 23 and really, really disable Hamas's capacity, that is I wouldn't say universal Israeli view, because nothing is universal, but that has an enormous amount of cachet. I only know one Israeli Jew, my friend Noah Ephron, who runs a wonderful podcast, who actually thought that was a bad idea. Um, and he made a very interesting argument for it. And Now, there comes a point where this defensive, this going on offense by way of defense turns into something else. And um, and that is where the division in Israeli society arises. But the idea that there was going to be some major military operation that killed a huge amount of people, that was not in and of itself, at the beginning of the war, that was not a contested proposition. And it doesn't map on at all, to go back to your question, to your views about whether Israel should be settling Gaza or settling the West Bank. And so I would say the median Israeli Jew that I know, and I would be interested, Lior, in your sense of whether this tracks with your sense of, but the median Israeli Jew I know, um, thinks the settlement policy is somewhere between overdone and outrageous, depending on range of opinion and, frankly, how close to Jerusalem the settlement is. And B,
So the actual
at,
settlers are a small minority?
well, I didn't say that. Well, the settlers are a small minority, objectively. And I have family who are radical settlers, by the way. The settlers themselves are a fairly diverse lot, in that there are some settlements that are just bedroom communities that people have moved to because housing is cheaper there. And there are some settlements that you can only live in if you're really ideologically committed to the project. And so, um, uh, I don't think when you assume that because somebody supports the war in Gaza or supported the war, and remember that by the time the ceasefire rolls around, a vast majority of Israelis support a ceasefire and hostage release deal. We weren't talking about, this was not a war that by the time this deal rolled around was politically popular at all. And people were quite critical of the continuity of the war, even in parts of the Israeli right. It was seen as a way to preserve the government, as a way to keep Netanyahu in power. So um, that does in your mind shouldn't map on at all to the question of how people feel about settlements, which, remember, is that, you know, that's a different question. And then still different from that is the question of how people feel about the Lebanon component of the war and the Iran component of the war, where you will get, I think, near unanimity among Israelis that that was A, defensive, B, justified, and C, successful. So, like, the my my caution is, whenever you go to Israel and you see something, there is a temptation to generalize what it is that you've seen, because that's what you do everywhere else in the world. So you go to Ukraine and you go to Mariupol, and it's, and it's bombed to the ground and under Russian occupation. And then you say, is this a generalizable description of what's happened in eastern Ukraine? And the answer is yes. Right? It's you can,
Like
like,
objectively, yes.
it's just objectively, Russia invaded Ukraine and they did this all over the place, right? And so you have a long front in which there is roughly the same story to tell, and there are obviously a million variations of the same story, but it's the same story: destroyed cities, murdered people, kidnapped kids. And there's a relatively simple account of every that accounts for an enormous percentage of it. Israel and Palestine is not like that. Um, it's a situation where, um, first of all, the story in Jerusalem is a different story from the story in Tel Aviv. The story in along those Gaza border communities is a different story from the story in the north. The story in Gaza is a different story from the story in the West Bank, and the story in the West Bank in cities that are controlled by the Palestinian Authority is a different story than the story in areas B and C, where the Israeli army is still the functioning if not provider of services, then certainly enforcer. And so I don't know what to do with that situation except insist on extreme detail and in precision in terms of what we're talking about. And I gravely mistrust people who have totalizing theories of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. So there is this known effect in the psychological literature. This is true. It actually exists. You can look it up. I don't think it's in the DSM, but it's an observed effect over time called Jerusalem syndrome, which is this effect where people go to Jerusalem and they develop, sometimes religiously inspired, sometimes just politically inspired, a belief that they have the solution to the Arab-Israeli conflict. And they want to give a speech about it or publish a paper
This is
or,
why I want to go to Israel. I told you an hour
um,
ago. This is why.
yeah. And and they and they and it generally abates once they have been given an opportunity to give a speech. And you can look it up, Jerusalem syndrome. And I think the closer somebody is to having Jerusalem syndrome, the less we should listen to them. And I think the 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 people whose contributions I value. Um, so let me give you an example from the Israeli side of somebody who, I don't know where he is these days or what he's doing, but the last non-Bibi appointed ambassador to Israel was a general, a former general, who's actually the brother of the current president, named Herzog. And he had spent the last several years before he became ambassador doing these little reports that nobody outside of a very small community read, but which were considered quite authoritative within a certain community. Just they were reports about how better from an international perspective and from an Israeli perspective to get food aid into Gaza. Just how could you streamline and improve the situation? And I have come to believe that, like, people who are just doing the work on one piece of the mosaic are extremely valuable and the more you try to zoom out and talk about the whole situation, and I don't mean there's no place for that, um, but the more you are likely to miss the important shit. Um, so that is my view.
I
But
have
I
another
don't look.
question that ties
I
into all
don't
of it.
begrudge Ta-Nehisi Coates. You know, like he got a lot of criticism for that. I don't begrudge anybody going to a place and reporting what you see and saying it appalls me.
That's pretty much what we did. But uh, anyway, well, if we have time, I'll describe my feelings about Ta-Nehisi Coates, my impressions. But I have another question that ties into all of this. So,
Yeah.
if I'm speaking in the typical leftist manner about this, what about the original sin, the so-called original sin of the creation of the state of Israel and Nakba and how that was conducted? And this didn't start on October 7th argument, and that this escalation of violence, it all started from somewhere, and it started from a place where Israelis were really, really terrible to the Palestinians. And then Hasek quotes a bunch of stuff from like Zionists at that time where they're
Mhm.
pretty openly colonialist, pretty openly like we need to get these people out of here. Like some of the stuff is like out in the open, right? What about that argument?
Well, so there's a
How
few,
does that tie into everything else?
yeah, there's a few components of that question. The first is that all countries are born in original sin. Um, and they all involve defining who is inside and who is outside of a community. And that process is never, or almost never, without line drawing that includes a fair bit of violence. And it is the project of nationalisms to ignore that reality. But, you know, you and I have spoken about uh, um, um, you and I have spoken about, um, you know, the great Ukrainian national hero Bogdan Khmelnytsky, who is also a figure in Jewish history for having been one of the great pre-Nazi Jew killers in all of history. Uh, I learned about the Khmelnytsky revolt in Jewish religious education, and and so that's one point. The process of nation defining is a relatively recent, it is a process of deciding whether it's, you know, whether whether Native Americans have a role in the United States or what land they get to keep, or whether it's, you know, the the unbelievable repression of Breton language by the Napoleonic forces. This is not a pretty process. It is never a pretty process. And in no country other than Israel does it um, continue many years after the fact to justify large scale violence and war in the other direction. So I just don't, I to the extent that people argue that there has to be a solution that gives Palestinians rights either within the confines of a single state or within the confines of two states, I am completely on board for that. To the extent that, you know, you want to go back to original sins. Why is the original sin not the expulsion of Jews the from that territory, um, you know, 1800 years ago? Why is the original sin? And by the way, self-determination is not a reward for good behavior. Otherwise, Germany and Japan, and for that matter, Russia, wouldn't be independent countries now. And so there's not, I actually have pretty limited patience for the idea that there's 1948 and 1967 created issues that we need to resolve, and they created rights deprivations that need to be addressed. By the way, just as 1947-48 did in India and Pakistan, and 1945 did all over Europe. And only in one of those cases do we say we should constantly revisit the premise. And I think it is legitimate to ask why we ask that question. And the answer, in my view, is that people have kind of cynically kept it going for a long time for other reasons. And I think people have different reasons for doing it. But this is just not a question we ask. And you could ask it about all kinds of Ukrainian land, I mean, including Crimea. Right? It's why is Putin
Let's not
wrong
get
that the
into that
original
4 minute. Oh, okay, go ahead. Why is Putin wrong?
why is
We have
Putin wrong
4 minutes. I'll
that
respond.
but no, but the point is, I would not put you in the position of having to respond. At some point, you just say a state is what a state is. And um, so, um, uh,
Okay, I gotta go and you gotta go. But we will obviously
yeah,
continue this in the
we are
days to
going
come.
to we are going to wrap. And uh, Nastia, on a train maybe, but still thinking about good Russians, bad Israelis, and important historical questions. Uh, and John Hawkinson, I would say that isn't the answer to this question the new state on the block theory, and the answer to that is absolutely not, because Israel is not the new state on the block. The entire post-Soviet world and post-Yugoslav world is a lot newer, as is a lot of African borders, and some East Asian borders. And we don't ask this question about any other state, at least not in its core. And I think the reason is that there is actually a left desire to delegitimate Israel as such, and that has to do with a anxiety about whether Jews are entitled to self-determination. And I do think that sounds in if you go back to where it comes from, it does not come from a pretty place. Um, we don't even ask this question about Liberia, which is you know, an overtly, you know, colonial enterprise. And so I actually don't have a lot of patience with it. Um, Folks, we're going to be back tomorrow. I don't think we're going to be talking about this, but we might be talking about Trump's speech and hostage releases and everything that's been going on today. We might be talking about other stuff, but I don't know who the hosts are going to be. I don't know who the guests are going to be. Kate, oh, look, Kate has OLC questions. We might be talking about OLC questions. I can promise you that Nastia will not be here from a train. Um, and Andrew suggests that we need Jack Goldsmith, which means we may have Jack Goldsmith. All of which is just a way of saying we're going to be back. It's going to be a blast. Um, and I'll see you then.